The U.S. Supreme Court overturned the landmark 1973 Roe versus Wade decision, the ruling that recognized women's constitutional right to abortion. For nearly 50 years, women in the United States had what is called autonomy to decide how they handled unwanted pregnancies, and the medical profession / industry was given license to provide and perform services that would help facilitate her desire to do the same. What's interesting is the reason that Roe v. Wade even became legislation. The case in 1969 was brought by a woman named Norma McCorvey, known also by the legal pseudonym as Jane Roe. And this woman in 1969 became pregnant with her third child. McCovey wanted an abortion but lived in the state of Texas, where adoption was, or abortion should I say, was illegal except when necessary to save the mother's life. On January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court issued a 7-2 decision holding that due process clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution provides a fundamental right to privacy, which is inclusive of the protection of a pregnant woman's right to an abortion. But the court also held that the right to abortion is not absolute and must be balanced against the government's interest in protecting women's health and prenatal life. Now, before this decision, women who for whatever reason wanted an abortion would be forced to resort to seeking out people who performed these procedures underground. And in many instances, these procedures were dangerous, detrimental, and at times of deadly consequences to the woman on whom they were performed. Before Roe versus Wade, women would have to go to back alleys and sit up on tables and be subject to all kinds of unseemly practices. Dirty clothes hangers and the like would be used to dismember and then pull the child out of the mother's womb if the mother did not want the child's life to come to term. So as a result, to avoid such calamity, legislation was passed to ensure safety. But at a closer look at the spirit of the law that made abortion illegal, I would like to suggest to us today that there are some things known as exceptions, so that originally abortion was illegal unless the mother's life was in danger. This modern day issue, this modern day revival of Roe versus Wade, and the opponents and the proponents who are clashing we need to understand that the modern day initiative to overturn Roe v. Wade has expanded the exceptions to include, along with the life of the mother being endangered, cases of rape and molestation and cases of incest. So now those who argued against, and I'm saying constitutionally, those who argued against Roe v. Wade being constitutional, or abortion's rights being constitutional, they said, then here is our argument, that abortion should not be legalized unless there is some sort of trauma that is associated with it, so that the woman who is raped or molested is having an unwanted pregnancy, so that the woman who is the victim of incest, or a woman who participates in incest and mingles her kindred blood with her kindred, that is considered a danger. So now they have expanded the exceptions. I want to suggest to you that an interesting observation about this Roe versus Wade issue and the fallout and the tension behind it all is that much of the outcry comes from people who don't feel that it's right to deal with the inconvenience of having to accept responsibility for their actions. So many people who are fighting against the overturning of Roe versus Wade, number one, have either ignored or have not researched the fact that there are provisions that even those who oppose it say that if you've been raped, if you've been molested, if you have been involved and engaged in incest, especially if it is against your will, we will make provisions for that. But what we are not going to do is, as a nation, we are not going to support abortion for any reason. I would like to further suggest to you that hypocrisy exists on both sides. On one side, there is a group that wants to protect unborn lives but have yet to pass or even advocate for legislation that protects black lives. People who are waving the banner, and they're waving the banner of the Word of God, saying that that is the standard, and they're trying to protect unborn lives, while people who have breath in their bodies and who walk every day are the aim and are the target of police brutality and social injustice and all of these other things that don't even protect their rights to live. On the other side of the coin, though, there are people who advocate for women to indiscriminately terminate unwanted pregnancies, but watch this, are adamant that a man who does not wish to be a participatory presence in a child's life that he sired, that this man be liable for support and that he would be jailed if he does not pay support. The same people who say that a woman ought to have a right to decide whether or not she wants to carry a child full term, even if she willfully laid down to make it, are the same people who say that if a man changes his mind after he does what he does, after he impregnates a woman and decides he does not want to support, then he ought to be locked up for life. Now, I want to suggest to you before I go any further, any man that lays down with a woman and does not take care of a child that he produces ain't a man at all. Let me go on record as saying that if you made him, you ought to take care of him, because he did not ask to come here. But for the sake of argument, if someone, for the sake of convenience, can say, I don't want to deal with the consequences of my actions, especially if I did these things willfully, for them to be able to do that, and then for someone else not to be able to decide that they don't want to take care of their responsibilities, is hypocritical and imbalanced. Even in the church, there is a division over Roe versus Wade. There are some people who are saying, watch this, that if you terminate a pregnancy, you ought to be liable for it, and they call it an unpardonable sin. And then there are other people who say that if you are the church, you ought to stand up for a person's right to do whatever it is they want to do. There is so much hypocrisy around this particular issue, and the Lord told me to take this moment that he's given me to share with the people of God what his thoughts are on it. Listen to what Romans chapter 2 verse number 17 says. Now if you who call yourself a Jew or a believer in God, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and approve of what is superior because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those who are in the dark, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you honor God by breaking breaking the law? As it is written, God's name, watch this, is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. In other words, what Paul is writing is he's writing to the church and says, listen, you have a particular position, you have a particular standard, but if you are not embodying, watch this, the standard of God, not just the part that you like, not just the part that you agree with, but if you are not embodying the standard of God, you bring a reproach on the church. And it says that the Gentiles look at you and you are blasphemed among them. In other words, if in fact you are not dealing with the whole counsel of God, if in fact you are only standing on certain principles to push your position, to push your thoughts, to push your idiosyncrasies, he says you are not representing God at all. What you are doing is presenting philosophy that fits well with you, philosophy that does not bring an indictment on you. But if you're really with him, even if you're wrong, you agree with the